The three-act structure is at the very core of storytelling. So if you want to find out how to tell better stories and what in the world an old guy in ancient Greece has to do with the movie that you're making, stick around for today's lesson. Hi, I'm Emily Bover, an author and a writing teacher here at Operation Author. And this is lesson 3 of the Make a Movie Bootcamp featuring Disney's The Lion King. This is also the single most important lesson in the entire bootcamp. But since you'll benefit from it most after completing lessons 1 and 2, I strongly recommend that you do that before going any further. Links for both of those lessons are in the description below. And now on to the 3 acts in every story. So here's the thing. For as long as humans have been around, we've been telling stories. And for as long as stories have been around, a whole bunch of them have been pretty bad. Now we know this for a fact because of a guy named Aristotle. As in Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, that Aristotle? Yeah, that Aristotle. I know, inconceivable, but it's true. So way back in 330 BC, this ancient Greek philosopher named Aristotle had a couple complaints to make. You see, he was spending all of those long days in outdoor amphitheaters watching plays during theatrical festivals, and he found himself quite often disappointed with what he was watching. So, being a famous thinker and writer of the time, he thought about the problem and wrote something called the Poetics, where he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, "Your plays are boring me big time." But luckily for us, Aristotle did more than complain. He went on to offer a means to fix the problem of bad stories. And here's what he said. Aristotle wrote that stories are not just a series of events, but that stories are a series of events that have, wait for it, a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, sheesh, thanks a lot for nothing, Aristotle, but doesn't every series of events automatically have a beginning, a middle, and an end? Well, the answer is no, they don't. And anybody who's listened to a 3-year-old tell a story knows this, when after 5 minutes long of listening to, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, you suddenly realize that there's no meaningful point in sight, and there's no obvious end in sight either. However cute it may be, there is no beginning, middle, and end to that conversation. But Aristotle gives us a way to turn events into stories. And it's my intention in this lesson to explain to you the absolute brilliance of what Aristotle meant by beginning, middle, and end, and how you can use this information to break open the meaning of stories and to tell great stories yourself. If you want to write this information down, you'll find a page in your workbook titled Lesson 3 Notes. The first thing to explain is that over the centuries, Aristotle's beginning, middle, and end have taken on different names. These days, the terms that are most often used are Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. But what do we mean by an act? Well, in some ways, it's helpful to think of an act as a different world. In Act 1, you can think of that as the normal world of the main character. In Act 2, you can think of that part of the story as the normal world of the main character that's been turned upside down. And in Act 3, you can think of that part of the story as the new world of the main character. Sometimes what I mean by the world actually means different locations, but it doesn't have to. It can mean that the reality of things has changed so much that it only feels like a different world for the main character. And in that case, what we're talking about then is the normal everyday reality of the main character, the reality of the main character turned upside down, and then the new reality of the main character. In short, when a series of events follows this pattern, normal world, world turned upside down, and the new world, it ceases to be just a series of events and it becomes a cohesive, integrated, satisfying story. So how does that help us tell better stories? Well, as an author, you now have a concrete to-do list. Your main job in Act 1 is to set things up. Set up the story, the world, the main character, and the main character's want. Your main job in Act 2 is to send your main character on a quest for the want, turning the main character's world upside down, forcing them to pursue the want, and eventually allowing them to fail in their quest. And that leads us to Act 3, where your main job as an author is to bring about the big showdown between the main character and the opposing forces over who gets the want. And it's during the big showdown that the main character changes and finally either gets the want or loses it forever, in either event bringing about a new world. By the way, I hope you caught all 4 of the ingredients that we discussed in the last lesson. If you'll remember the 3 C's in a question, every story ever told has a character who undergoes conflict and change, all while pursuing a want. Now, if you think about it for a moment, you'll realize that all 4 of those ingredients are found in each of the 3 acts of a story. But if you look a little closer, you'll also notice something kind of helpful. The beginning of every story, Act 1, the setup, has character, conflict, change, and a want. But what's the overwhelming focus of Act 1? Well, it's all about setting up the main character and the main character's want. Act 2, the middle of every story, also has all 4 ingredients, but what's the focus there? Well, the focus in Act 2 is the conflict as the main character pursues the want. And in Act 3, while it too has all 4 ingredients, the focus there is most heavily on the change that the main character undergoes in the final showdown over the want. So while all 4 ingredients are found in each of these acts, you can think of Act 1 as the world of the character, Act 2 as the world of the conflict, and Act 3 as the world of change, all of which is driven by the want. If you can do that in an interesting way, you've done so much more than just recount a series of events. You've told a tremendous story. By the way, can you guess which act Aristotle said that most authors forget? Well, we discussed last time how most often the ingredients that are forgotten are change and a want, and Aristotle agreed. He wrote that most authors do a great job of creating interesting characters and interesting worlds and having them go on interesting quests, but that once the main character is in Act 2 on that quest, most authors struggle to find a meaningful way to bring about a satisfying end, a real honest, believable yet unexpected end that brings together all of the aspects of the story in the big showdown. And often that's because the author never gave much thought as to why the main character went on the quest in the first place. In other words, the author had forgotten to give the main character a real want. So I hope you're starting to see Aristotle's brilliance here, that a story is not just a series of events, but that it's a series of events with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so far, all of this is really nice sounding theory, but what does it look like in real life? Well, let's take a look at the 3-act structure of The Lion King and find out. Take a look at chart 3A in your workbook. This is a storyboard of The Lion King. A storyboard is a tool that authors use to see if their story works. It's the most essential elements of a story broken into their proper acts. Let's remind ourselves of what these acts are. Act 1 is the normal world. Act 2 is the world turned upside down, and Act 3 is the world made new. The job is, in Act 1, to set up the main character's world, including their want. In Act 2, to send the main character on a series of adventures pursuing a want. And in Act 3, to force the main character into a big showdown for the want that will result in change. You might have noticed, by the way, that the acts are different sizes. In fact, Act 1 usually takes up about the first quarter of a movie. Act 2 is a full half of the movie, and Act 3 is the last quarter of the movie. So let's storyboard the most important parts of The Lion King and see how this story works. Looking at Act 1, how did the writers of The Lion King set the movie up? Well, who's the main character of The Lion King? Simba. What is Simba like in Act 1? Well, he's a lion cub prince. He's fun-loving, but let's face it, he is a little bit selfish. Where does this take place? Pride Rock. When? During the reign of Mufasa. And now let's key in a little bit on the main character, Simba. What is it that Simba wants? Well, he sings a whole song about it. He just can't wait to be king so that he can do whatever he wants. Now, in Act 1, as far as Simba is concerned, the conflict is that he's just too young. But that's okay. Eventually, he'll grow up, he'll grow a mane, and in time, he's going to be king so that he can do whatever he wants. But then everything changes when we come to one of the most dynamic elements in every story, the turning point. Just like the name suggests, a turning point is an event or a series of events that create a major pivot in the story. On this chart, the major turning points are found in those two red boxes to make them stand out. Creating compelling turning points is one of the greatest parts of storytelling. And turning points are completely essential for every story. And that should make sense to you. I mean, think about it. Wouldn't every Act 1 normal world just go on forever unless something happened to turn the main character's world upside down and send them on a quest? Well, this big event is called a turning point. And every story has a major turning point that moves the story from Act 1 into Act 2, and another major turning point that will move the story from Act 2 to Act 3. So, what was the first major turning point for Simba? What happens in The Lion King that turns Simba's normal world upside down and eventually sends him on a quest to run away from the Act 1 normal world of Pride Rock? I'll give you a second to think about it, and then I'll show you what it is.
You, Scar. I mean, you're one of us. I mean, you're our pal.
Charmed.
Oh, I like that. He's not king, but he's still so proper. Hey, to bring us anything to eat, Scar? Old buddy, old pal, huh? Did ya?
I don't think you really deserve this. I practically gift-wrapped those cubs for you, and you couldn't even dispose of them.
Well, you know, it wasn't exactly like they was alone, Scar. Yeah, what are you supposed to do? Kill Mufasa?
Precisely.
We'll be prepared. For what?
For the death of the king.
Right, is he sick?
No, fool, we're gonna kill him. And Simba, too.
Great idea! Who needs a king? No king, no king, la 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 la.
Idiots! There will be a king!
Hey, but you said
I will be king. Stick with me, and you'll never go hungry again!
Well, Simba doesn't realize it, but when Scar reveals his plan to kill Mufasa and Simba and become the king, Simba's world turns upside down. This changes everything, and it launches Simba from the Act 1 king in waiting into the Act 2 Simba, who is a prince that has been marked for death. So what happens in Act 2 of The Lion King? Well, after Mufasa's death, Simba runs away and he escapes and finds a paradise in the middle of nowhere. At this point, Simba takes on a new want. His new want is to run away from his past mistakes and his future as the king so that he can do whatever he wants. During Act 2, you have several what we're going to call conflict adventures. Simba survives a stampede only to watch his father die. Then he's pursued by hyenas and he almost dies in the desert. Well, he's saved from that fate by Timon and Pumbaa, and then Simba decides to stay and grow up in paradise, learning about this Hakuna Matata, put your worries behind you kind of attitude. Well, all of that's challenged one day when Simba is reunited with Nala and she invites him to come back to Pride Rock to become king. Now, at that point, Simba turns down the opportunity and he says, why don't you just stay here and we can live life however we want? So you can see that as far as Simba goes, some things have changed, but some things haven't changed. He wanted to be king in Act 1 so he could live life on his own terms. Now in Act 2, a lot of things have changed, but ultimately, Simba still wants to live life by his rules. And this no worries reality could have gone on forever had Simba not been faced with the realization that his quest, his want to run away from the past, had failed. And this is something you'll start to notice in every movie. The main character is always doomed to fail somehow in their Act 2 quest. And if you think about it, this failure has to happen. Otherwise, why in the world would the main character show up for the big showdown of Act 3? So in The Lion King, when did the second major turning point happen? When did Simba realize for sure that his quest for his Act 2 want to run away from his past and his destiny as king fail?
Look hard. You see, he lives in you. Simba.
Father?
Simba, you have forgotten me.
No. How could I?
You have forgotten who you are, and so forgotten me. Look inside yourself, Simba. You are more than what you have become. You must take your place in the circle of life.
How can I go back? I'm not who I used to be.
Remember who you are. You are my son, and the one true king. Remember who you are.
What was that? The weather. Very peculiar, don't you think?
Yeah. Looks like the winds are changing.
Change is good.
Yeah, but it's not easy. I know what I have to do, but going back means I'll have to face my past. I've been running from it for so long. Ow! Jeez, what was that for?
It doesn't matter. It's in the past.
Yeah, but it still hurts.
Oh, yes, the past can hurt. But the way I see it, you can either run from it or learn from it. You see? So what are you going to do?
First, I'm gonna take your stick.
No, not a stick. Hey, where are you going?
I'm going back!
Good. Go on, get out.
When Rafiki and Mufasa show Simba that he is meant for more, Act 3 begins. And this leads Simba to reject the put your past behind you, Hakuna Matata ideas of the second act, and to embrace the third act, the big showdown with his Uncle Scar. So during the third act, Simba returns to Pride Rock, and he yet again has a new want. He wants to return to Pride Rock so that he can face his past and face his uncle. Simba has a plan. He's going to confront Scar, and he's going to have the lionesses help him. Well, at first it seems to work. After all, Simba is a lot stronger than Scar, and the lionesses are going to help him. But then the plan fails when Scar uses Simba's past against him. But when Simba realizes that Scar killed Mufasa, Simba is finally able to overcome his uncle and change into the king that he was born to be. And when do we see this change? What is the climatic moment of The Lion King?
Murderer. Simba, please have mercy, I beg you.
You don't deserve to live.
But, Simba, I am family. It's the hyenas who are the real enemy. It was their fault. It was their idea.
Why should I believe you? Everything you ever told me was a lie.
What are you going to do? You wouldn't kill your old uncle.
No, Scar. I'm not like you.
Oh, Simba, thank you. You are truly noble. I'll make it up to you, I promise. How can I prove myself to you? Tell me, anything.
Run. Run away, Scar. And never return.
Yes, of course. As you wish, Your Majesty. Ah, my friend.
Friends? I thought he said we were the enemy.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
Ed?
Simba had Scar just where he wanted him, and he would have been justified in killing his uncle for all of the horrible things that he'd done to the family and to the entire Pride Land. But at that moment, Simba chose to change. He chose to forgive his uncle and become a truly great king. This is the climatic moment of The Lion King. And the beautiful change that Simba undergoes at this moment is what the whole movie has been about. Because let's face it, the Simba that you met back in Act 1, the one who thought that being king would be fun because people would have to do what you wanted all the time, he would not have made a good king. No, it took all of the lessons and the heartache of Act 2 and then the decision to face his past and forgive his uncle that turned Simba into the king that he was born to be. And because of all that, the hyenas turn on Scar and leave. Simba becomes king. Nala becomes queen. The circle of life continues, and all is right at Pride Rock. Just take a look at this storyboard and see how well all of the pieces of The Lion King fit together, not just as a series of events, not just as an intriguing Act 1 and an exciting Act 2 that go on indefinitely and then sort of ends. Rather, this is a series of story ingredients artfully crafted and placed into a series of events that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And when taken together as a whole, all of the different pieces work together to tell a meaningful story. And now it's your turn. Take a look at chart 3B, and this is the storyboard for your movie. So let's remind yourself first what these acts are. Act 1, the normal world. Act 2, the world turned upside down. And Act 3, the world made new. So in the first act, let's take a look at that. Your job there is to set up your main character's world. But they're not going to be able to stay in that world forever. And that's where that red box down there comes into play, that first major turning point. What can you put in your main character's way to turn their world upside down, to force them on a quest? The quest then is Act 2, and there's a series of adventures that they have here pursuing the one. This will take up about half or more of your story. So you notice in here that there's 4 different conflict adventures that your main character can go through. They don't have to, though. They can go through as few or as many adventures as they need for the sake of the story. But at the end of Act 2, their quest is going to somehow fail, which is good because that will allow you to launch them into the big showdown. So what is it? What is that second major turning point that forces them into the big showdown of the Act 3 world? And what is it at the climactic moment that allows the main character to change in order to bring about a satisfying end? So start by writing down what you already have in your movie, and then use the storyboard to brainstorm new and better ideas for every element on this chart. One idea is to play around with the 2 major turning points and see what sort of different events could happen to your main character to launch them into Act 2 and then eventually into the big showdown of Act 3. If you want, print off a whole bunch of copies of this so you can play around with different versions of your story, or make your own storyboard on a whiteboard, a large piece of paper on the wall, whatever works for you. If you get stuck, take your story to your story group and have them brainstorm ideas with you. You all now have a common story language, and so you can say things like, well, what if you turned your world upside down doing this? Or what if your main character's want in this act was something else? Once you've got your story where you want it, it's time to make your movie version 3.0. So the homework assignment for lesson 3 is to use chart 3B, the storyboard, to plan the 3 acts of your movie, and then make a new version of your movie. This one can be up to 12 minutes long. Once you've completed your movie 3.0, you are ready to move on to the final lesson in this boot camp, lesson 4. Hey, if you're liking this free boot camp, why not give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel? While you're at it, I'd love to know what your favorite movie is. So take a second and list it in the comments below and see how many other people agree with your top choice. Once you've completed your movie 3.0, you're ready to move on to the final lesson in this boot camp. So I will see you in lesson 4. Now go make a better movie.